Hello, this is Jim Schaefer, the executive producer and host of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. My guest today is Randy Bomer, co-author of the book For a Better World, Reading and Writing for Social Action. Welcome to Rip Rap, Randy.
Thanks, good to be here.
This is a wonderful book, but I was intrigued right from the beginning at the dedications dedicated to every educator who spends part of her teaching day turned against the current. What caused you and Catherine, your co-author, to use that?
A lot of teachers, especially if they want to work on, if they want to allow the kids to become participants in democracy, if they really want to educate for citizenship, a lot of teachers feel like they're taking a tremendous risk. It feels like they may get in trouble, or somebody may question what they're doing, just because some of what the topics that the kids might take might be things that might be controversial among some families or in some neighborhoods. And so the willingness to really educate for the purpose of making a better democracy or making a better world is a little bit risky. And it's especially risky in the current environment where testing is driving so much of the curriculum. You know, the consequences of tests, where a school can be shamed for years as a result of its test scores not rising at a required rate, or the consequences for individual principals who might be fired or moved as a result of their test scores not going up. They make a really fearful environment in a lot of the schools. And so it feels a lot of times like if teachers are going to do stuff that matters in the world outside of school, something outside the narrow curriculum that gets tested by tests, they're taking a risk. And so you have to love people and support people who would want to do that with their lives.
Well, and as you pointed out, I mean, as president of the National Council of Teachers of English, you're in a particular position to take a look at this concept of no child left behind and standardized testing as ways of causing literacy to happen.
Yeah, the National Council of Teachers of English has, for at least 30 years, taken positions that testing, though it's an important part of understanding what's going on with kids and whether they're learning and whether they're able to do things suddenly on demand when we ask them to, it isn't really enough for a teacher to know what a kid is learning or what a kid can do. And it also has a tendency of narrowing the curriculum. And this is especially true in English, which is an art as much as it is a skill. It's especially true in English that testing tends to constrain and narrow what people will pay attention to. It keeps them from treating works of art as art sometimes. It keeps them from treating important topics as being related to the world today. And it tends to turn everything into little tiny atomic skills that every person is supposed to be able to get from a teacher and then put back out on a test day. And that's not the way people really are, and it's not the way learning really happens. And so, so it's true that NCTE, the National Council of Teachers of English, has had a tradition of questioning that form of assessment, even though we recognize that the public wants to know, are our kids learning and how well are the schools doing?
You and Catherine discussed an approach in your book For a Better World, Reading and Writing for Social Action about the teaching of reading and writing that embodies certain characteristics like process and workshop and community. And I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about those.
Yeah, a writing workshop is a place, or in the case of a writing workshop, it also could be a reading workshop. But a workshop classroom is a place where students come every day, and they know what they're working on. They have work that's theirs. They know that they're pursuing particular intellectual projects as readers. There are authors they're concerned about, or issues they're concerned about, and from one day to the next, they're pursuing that project. The days connect through the kids' intentions. In a writing workshop, kids take up projects that may take them a long time to work on, that actually demand something of them as writers, that are ambitious, serious projects for readers. So those that environment is one in which kids are making a lot of decisions. And in order to support those decisions, the teacher does a tremendous amount of teaching about skills, about conventions of language, but also about how do you do things? How do you figure out if you have an idea? How do you get all the pieces of an idea out so that you can put them together into a draft? If your draft isn't saying what you want it to say, how do you start to figure out which part to work on first, and what's the process that you can go through in order to grow a draft from an early draft to a finished draft. And because kids are making so many decisions and in a way taking some risks, there needs to be a sense of community in that place. It needs to feel like a safe place for kids. Learners learn when they feel safe, when they feel like the people around them are not going to attack them, when they feel like they're not going to be under the gun in some way. And so a workshop classroom tries to be a place that's a community where people believe that they can be supported by others. Also, they believe that a community, this idea of community is important because you want to feel as a writer like there are people waiting to hear what you've got to say. It's important that you believe that there are others out there listening so that you can find a voice. And that's the kind of environment that we try to create for kids, and teachers work really hard on trying to create that kind of environment for kids.
Well, I like your notion of the dialogic approach, that there's a conversation back and forth between teacher and students and other students and other people in the community.
Yeah. Yeah, learning is a dialogue. I mean, we learn, we know what we know because we're getting ready to say it to somebody. You know how a lot of the time, most of us go through the day, and a lot of the time we're rehearsing conversations that we think we might have. In a way, that's what our thinking is imagining our way into conversations we might have, or imagining revisions of conversations we did have. I wish I'd said that. And so we're trying to, we think with others in our minds. And so this idea of dialogue between teachers and kids, kids in their world, is really tries to capture accurately the nature of thinking, and so that means in order to invite kids into a dialogue, we have to help them become responsive, help them to feel like they can tune in to their own thoughts after listening to somebody else's thoughts. They learn how to really listen to somebody else. They learn how to really read something and really take in what the author was saying that was not already in their mind. And then then they make an answer to that. They make a response. And tuning into your own thoughts in response to those of others is the basis of thinking. And yet, in schools, so much of the time, when kids pay attention to their own thoughts, we say their mind's wandering. We say they're not with us because they're paying attention to their own thoughts. That's a bad thing. But in a process classroom or a workshop classroom, that's what we're aiming for.
Well, that was one of the things that fascinated me about the approach, is the idea of working to empower students. And I think that's behind the whole thing, is listening to them, working with them to help overcome the silencing. Right.
It's an effort to empower them in deep ways. Now, that doesn't mean that the kids, that an individual's ego or that an individual's willfulness overpowers everything in their environment, because that wouldn't be a dialogue either. So empowerment isn't sort of the amplification of the self, like making the kid as huge as they can become. It's really empowering them to really be able to see and notice one another, to really take in what's going on in the world around them, and helping them to be able to respond to works of literature in ways that are meaningful.
Well, I found it also interesting that it was looking at their own lived experience, which they have some, and then the teachers honoring the language of the students' everyday lives, that looking at that and pulling out the things. You don't have to look way over to some other country, it's right there.
Right. In very practical terms, that means that though kids will read literatures of other countries, though they'll read literatures of great traditions in the world, we will also value as literature the stories that the kids bring in with them, the stories that live in their families that their grandparents told them, the stories of things that have happened to them. So those things are valued and important in the room. It's not just other people's stuff that's important in the room. And the language that they bring to tell those stories is good. It's not, families and communities speak a lot of different kinds of language, and it's interesting and important to be able to study the differences among language. It's important to be able to switch from one language into another according to the situation. But we need to be able to build that inquiry on the basis of respect for each other's language.
Well, in the book, there's a lot of examples where students started coming up with some ideas of what they wanted to react to in terms of social action. And then you talk about there's quite a wide variety of ways of responding to those ideas.
Yeah. Kids, in the examples in this book include kids responding to us coming close to going to war, so sort of national issues. This particular group of boys who were concerned about the war, this was another war with Iraq in a different time, they were concerned about the approach of this war. At first they were very excited about it. They were very much in favor of it. And as they thought about it and started looking at for one thing, what they did was looked at the globe. This was a group of 10-year-old boys. They looked at the globe and they noticed that the countries in that region of the world are awfully close together. It looked to them like they were close together, and that if you started a war in one place, it would probably have repercussions in the other places around there. So just by looking at the map, they started to wonder whether this might be a big step.
How did you and Catherine get involved with this kind of discourse of social action? What was the impetus? How did you start moving toward this?
Well, we went to the same school, Teachers College, Columbia University, and there we took a couple of classes in Dewey together, and we took some classes taught by a contemporary educational philosopher named Maxine Green, who was a teacher for both of us. And she really changed the way we thought about what you're doing when you're teaching. What you're doing when you're teaching drama or music, as well as what you're doing when you're teaching language arts or social studies or English or a foreign language. The whole way that we were sort of oriented or educated to think about education was that it's for democracy, it's for a public. Public schools are for creating publics. So it was really a part of our early education. We also both worked at a place that was about professional development in this sort of writing workshop way of teaching, or reading and writing workshop way of teaching, the Teachers College Reading and Writing Project. And so because we were working there, we became known and a little bit expert at that mode of teaching.
But what fascinates me is literacy not just as another concept that you read in a book. It's literacy as a kind of a vibrant living process or dynamic of living as you read, reflect, and act.
It's really true. I mean, we talk in school about, say, writing skills or reading skills as if they live outside of human relationships and human interactions, but they really don't. Every reading act is an act of relationship, and every writing act is an act of relationship, and it fits into specific parts of your life. You write to somebody for some reason. Either you write to your boss because you have to, or you write to your boss because you went to some place and you're supposed to report about what was going on in that place. You write to somebody that you love in order to get them to love you back, or to convey your feelings to them. So we have our writing in life outside of school exists in these very situated ways, inside of our life. And a lot of times in school we sort of strip it of the situation and act like it's still the same stuff, but it doesn't usually transfer for most people. Most people don't have that powerful of a writing life. Most people don't have that powerful of a reading life. They don't feel like those things are something that really fits into their lives. And so if we teach it in a different way, if we teach people how to fit it into their life instead of teaching it as just a set of skills, maybe it can be more durable. Maybe it'll do people more good in their lives. Maybe people will actually be more empowered to participate in their democracy and read for their growth and for learning about new things to care about.
Well, like Maxine Green's book about releasing imagination, if we have that kind of power, we have that kind of structure, we have that kind of competence, then we can take a look at overcoming the silencing, articulating, and acting on things. You place a profound emphasis in your book on encouraging both students and teachers to bring the world outside, as we said, into the classroom, and then to take action. As the current president of the NCTE, you're currently living proof of those ways, that teachers have to be more a part of the larger political process that shapes schooling and other important aspects of children's lives. We've started to talk a little bit about that, but you're directly throwing down kind of a challenge to people that would just as soon sometimes say, well, my classroom, that's about it.
I think so. I mean, for a couple of reasons. One reason is that our country needs us. Our country needs the voices of its educators. You can't make policy for schools without having the voices of the people who live in schools as part of that policy making. And that's what has been going on, unfortunately, a lot of the time for the past 10 years. The national policy conversation has become more and more intense. More people have cared about, sort of on a national level, what's happening in education. We've never had an administration that cares about education policy the way we do now. That's a blessing and a curse. It is a blessing for it to be a national conversation if people who are most expert about the processes of learning and teaching are part of the conversation. And teachers have a lot of times, I feel like we have allowed business people and politicians to take our role in that, and we need to try to continue to step up to that. Maybe we've been shut out at times systematically so that people can take over that conversation. That may be, or it may be that we haven't stepped up in the ways that we need to, and so I think we have to. Our country needs us. It's service to the world that we live in. Also, we're not educators just by sort of pointing our education at a few kids and only giving it to them. You have to educate a community. You have to educate the world. And so, if we're involved in new forms of education and taking on new goals in the ways we teach kids in the world, we need to educate everybody about that. These are important things, and they're worth talking to everybody about. Also, though, in order for teachers to be able to teach kids how to participate in a democracy, in order for teachers to teach kids how to take social action, teachers have to have had experiences at taking social action. And many of us haven't. We figured out 30 years ago that teachers who are teaching writing need to be writers, or need to have powerful experiences of writing anyway at times in their life. The same thing is true for teaching social action. We need to have had powerful experiences of taking social action, of planning it, organizing it, participating in it, in order to have stuff to say to kids, especially in order to respond to their beginning efforts when the kids are naive and stumbling around and trying to figure out what to do. There's not a kit that's going to tell us how to do that. That's got to be responsive out of our wisdom as adults. We have a responsibility to educate ourselves as citizens so that we can hand it over to our kids. That's part of the generational responsibility of schooling.
I tell my own students, you're next.
Right.
You know, without question, my generation, your generation will die, and they'll be next. Are they ready?
Right.
Or, you know, and I've got a button that says, this is not a dress rehearsal.
Right, this is the deal, yeah.
And that is true. And I think the teachers do have that ability to address the issues. They've got the skills, but it may feel comfortable at first to step up and into the public space and say, well, this is what I do. Although it shouldn't be so strange, because in teaching process writing, it should be transparent. How do you get what you do? How do you arrive at it? What are you doing? You know, and if they just translate that into a little more public space, maybe that will help them.
But it's scary, and maybe many of us maybe many of us go into teaching not because we see ourselves as, you know, riding in on a white horse to save the day, and we don't have that. That isn't really, maybe that's not the myth that we have lived by in becoming educators. A lot of people become educators maybe because they like being in school. They were good at it, and they enjoy it. It has things in it that interest them and reward them, and so they stay with the school thing. And so it's to step out into public debate is really different from that, and I think is really challenging for many of us. That's how I feel about myself. I'm sure that there are other people who went into teaching for many different reasons, but for me it is scary to try to speak up, to try to make appointments with my member of Congress, and go in there and talk to them and claim what I know in that conversation. I know what I'm talking. I know about education. I should be able to talk to you about it. And I'm one of your constituents. I should be able to talk to you about this issue. Or to go to the Department of Education in Washington and talk to people about it. It's tricky, and it's true that my position with NCTE has called on me to put my money where my mouth is, in a way, to show whether I'm really willing to do this thing. And it's been challenging, and yet I think it's a responsibility that we all have, not just because of being a president of something.
Oh, that's wonderful. I was just wanting in the sense of putting a little more edge in terms of the social action, if you've got any response to that, but you're still fairly new into the office.
Well, we in the NCTE, we work on a presidential team. There are 4 of us who do it for 4 years, and so really, in a way, this is my 3rd year in this role. And yeah, we're doing a lot. We are doing a lot of work to try to create the organization as being of more service to the national policy conversation. We're trying to lay down an infrastructure of support and action and responsiveness in the profession and in the world that will allow us over the long haul to be an effective policy player.
Well, and it is a tough situation right now, because I've heard a lot from my colleagues too who are teaching. What is this? What next?
Well, it's true.
And where is this going?
It's true. It is very likely that the president's testing and school punishment law, the one that was passed in the first administration and the one that will be passed most likely in the second administration, makes the educational environment fearful and harsh and punishing for kids, most of all. And secondly, for teachers and administrators. It's a very harsh environment. It's hard for people to stay in the profession. And some people, when we visit them privately, when we visit members of Congress privately on Capitol Hill, they tell us that the agenda really is to end public education. They're basically trying to drive this system into a wall and discredit it publicly so that they can privatize the education system because they really believe that private things work better than public things. So a lot of the words that are used and a lot of the arguments that are used really mean the opposite of what they mean. No Child Left Behind is the opposite of what it means. It's a law about leaving children behind. It's a law about punishing schools and shaming them in public, so that then privatization seems like a natural, normal thing to do. Because up until now, people have held on to their schools. People love their schools. When Phi Delta Kappan every year does a national poll, every person they poll thinks their kid's school is really great, even though they know from the media that the schools are failing. And so the need for educators to be able to tell a different story, an alternative story, becomes greater. And I don't think people really realize even the degree to which educators think that that's the agenda behind this education and shaming law, that it is about moving toward a more private system, more vouchers, more privatization of schooling.
Well, what I've heard and talked with people about is public policy is one aspect of it, and all the frustration and embarrassment and awkwardness and even maybe anger, if I'd say it that way, about what's happening. But underneath that, these really good people are really upset over the silencing that could represent. That then their students that they are passionately concerned about may not be able to speak, may not be able to overcome, so that they can say the things that they have to say out of their heart.
Well, yes, that's really true. I mean, I feel that way too, and people say similar things to me. It's that their kids' voices aren't able to be heard, partly because, again, this testing regime has so narrowed the curriculum that nobody wants to hear from the kids. It's become very, very narrow. It's become very low standards because it's all about what can be tested. It's not about real thoughtfulness and real high standards at all. high levels of thinking. It's got nothing to do with anything that anybody else would consider high standards. It's only in this sort of testing mindset that a high score on a test that doesn't ask very much of you is thought of as a high standard. But also the systems of teaching that are being pushed by the Department of Education right now all have to do with drilling kids mostly in the smallest atomic units of language, so letters and sounds. And this is in the case of beginning reading, for struggling readers in middle grades, and even in high school for kids who are struggling with reading. The issue for a particular high school student may be that they can read everything out loud and they don't know what they read. They can't figure. They don't understand what they read. But the answer that the administration is pushing, and why does the administration care about this? But the answer that the administration is pushing is more drill on particular letters and their sounds, which is a perverse way of shutting kids up, not letting them make meaning out of their experience, not letting them really read for meaning or think about things meaningfully, but to denature language and take it apart into its smallest bits so that it doesn't have any meaning. So I think the grief that the people are expressing to you over the loss of their kids' voices is very real. They're not exaggerating. And they're not just complaining, as people might think, they're not complaining about being held accountable for the quality of their work. They're complaining about the diminishment of the definition of language and learning to these tiny, ridiculous little bits.
That's exactly what it is. It's almost like they're not even concerned about themselves, although they have a right to be concerned about their professional future. It's what's happening with the students and what's the impact of all this stuff, tripping people up with, this kind of nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of important things to know about language. There are many things in grammar that at certain strategic times it's important to let learners in on. But they need to know what it's for. They need to be trying to do something with language in order to have a place to put their knowledge of how a sentence works. And so most people remember just being sort of silenced and shut down by the grammar instruction they received in elementary, middle, and high school, the same parts of speech over and over again. It doesn't feel like you're being given language to express yourself with, that you're being given the tools you need to do things in the world. It feels often to people feels like they're just being smothered under this trivial and unimportant things.
Well, I want to thank you for being on Rip Rap. Your book really points to what language and teaching of it can go toward, and I appreciate you being on the program.
Well, thanks very much for having me.